right. Our first item, Justice Center expansion update from Turner, Townsend, Heery with David Mendez.
Good morning, David Mendez with Turner and Townsend Heery. I've given you an updated spreadsheet this morning. There are no changes from last week for the construction budget amounts. What you have now, though, is the updated amounts that we've spent to date. So if you'll look on the columns to the right, starting with the second page, you'll see where we are with those soft cost invoices. The project, I'm expecting the first of every month I get an update to the schedule. Checked with the contractor. They're still tracking on time for the scheduled completion. I'll get that update by Friday of this week. So next week I'll have an update if there's any variances moving forward. The status of the building, the structural is complete. I don't know how close you've been paying attention to the equipment and the activity going on there, but the structural component of that is nearly complete. The crane is off-site now. They're framing with the metal stud wall framing on the exterior of the building, and they're spraying the fireproofing into the structure that's up there. Plumbing and electrical conduits are being installed, and they started the first layer of the roof on top of the metal decking is a Den's roofing, a Den's deck, and that's being installed now. So they'll have here in a couple of weeks, they'll have the first layer of making that watertight on the roof before they actually start the finished roofing. So we'll have by the end of August, we'll be watertight on the roof part of it, and working towards the biggest thing that you should be looking for is the exterior of the building, the envelope being completed so that they can get that wrapped up before we start getting temperature drops. So that's called an EFIS system, and that'll be nearing complete by the end of October. So that's my report for this week.
Okay, any questions?
No questions. Thank you so much. I appreciate the update.
I do have one question. The item on the business meeting that we are approving today, is that going to be a soft cost, or is that going to be in the design contingency?
I didn't see which item you have on your...
I think it's like $7,000 has to do with an update for LCA. It's with the architects.
Yes, that's. I have an item. If you look at the soft costs towards the bottom of that, I added for additional costs for the design team. So that will be. What I've done with that is an added cost for the architect to engineer the roof anchors. We added roof anchors for the maintenance department to access windows and such. And so rather than having the contractors mark up on that engineering service, I'm contracting that directly with the architect for that added structural engineer to look at those.
Okay, so it does not come out of design contingency, it comes out of soft costs.
Well, design is a soft cost, but I added an extra line for added architectural services, anticipating that we would have some of that.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. All right, our second item, Coroner Lab Presentation with our elected coroner, Dr. Duke Johnson.
Thank you very much for the time. From our last meeting
Is
on
your
the...
microphone on? I can't.
Yeah, it
Okay,
is.
thank
Do
you.
I not have it close enough? All right. From our last meeting on the 22nd, what I was requested to do, let me see if I can move this forward. Oops, it's not.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. I was requested to answer 2 questions remaining from that meeting to, first of all, provide documentation that includes that the autopsy lab, in adding it back into this year's budget, wouldn't disqualify us from obtaining the Coverdell grant in the future. And then number 2, what is my recommended pathway for moving forward? And what I wanted to do is put this in context of the meeting that I was just recently at. Ooh, somehow it's not, let me. And the answer initially is that the proof that we're not being disqualified lies in the fact that you can't be disqualified from something that you're not able to apply for in the first place. And what I mean by that is anyone who does not have an operable, operating, upfront medical examiner lab operating cannot qualify to apply for Coverdell grants, and that's what I'll talk about here. And so in the context of this meeting, what I'm about to show you are slides that I took pictures from the presentation. And this is the largest coroner conference of the year globally. It's an international conference. There were people there from other countries. There were 400 people in the room, just to give you a context. And by the way, there are 2,000 coroners in the United States, and there are about 50 that are accredited, and we're one of those 50. And this year there was a special recognition for those who received accreditation, and we were only one of about 6 that were recognized this year. So in other words, very, very few people get accredited. And the reason that I'm bringing that up is that once you're accredited and once you have a lab, then applying for Coverdell grants, your chances of getting that go up immensely. Another thing that's really important too is while we were going through accreditation, is part of the accreditation process is the medical examiners you're using. And we were using and have been using Spokane, but during that process it was revealed that Spokane medical examiner office was not meeting all of their qualifications. In fact, their issue was that they were doing too many autopsies, and they were in essence kind of put on probation because of it. Well, other coroners in North Idaho that I saw last week, they said, we can hardly wait until you guys have an operable medical examiner office because you'll be able to help us become accredited too. So, I mean, in other words, and that's why I'm not worried about whether or not they'll be able to want to send us, because we're going to help them become accredited. So I'm not worried about that coming up. But here's pictures I took from the slide, and this is teaching all of these coroners about the grant itself. And so what's really important here is the concept of that this is only given to operable ones. And so what it says, let me give you some overall information. The program, its summary was it grants awards to states and local governments to help them improve the quality of what they already have. And the timeliness, et cetera, et cetera. And then the goal of the program is to assist forensic science laboratories and medical examiners' offices to improve, in other words, what they already have. In other words, it's already for operating medical examiners' offices. If it was for brand new, there would be lots of medical examiner offices around the country and labs around the country. There's right now one in Seattle and one in Spokane for the state of Washington. There's one in the state of Idaho in Boise. There's one in Montana, and that's in Missoula. In other words, they're very, very rare because they do not give these grants to people who don't have operable labs. They're only giving them to people who have them. And then as you can see further down, as far as the objectives are concerned, are to support laboratories. In other words, this is what they do. They only give money to those that are functioning. And then part of the other objectives, again, is to carry out a substantial part of the program intended to improve something that already exists, provided by laboratories operated by, and those operated by. In other words, they're always in operation for Coverdell to give a grant to them. And so that's why when you don't have a functioning lab, then they don't give the grants for that purpose. Next slide then, please. But here are what is permissible, and this is what's exciting for us in the future, is that once we have an operable lab, once we have, and since we're accredited, that puts us in the upper echelon. Nobody can ever guarantee you're going to get a grant, but obviously we're in the top 50 of 2,000, so we'd be very, very competitive. And so what they do allow with those grants of $300,000 to $500,000, they allow us to use that money for salary, equipment, and instrumentation, yet to maintain our accreditation, to train people. And then at that point, once you are operable, they allow for renovation or construction or expansion. So I could use that money in Coverdale for then phase 2 and phase 3, but not phase 1. And they say, and that's why I highlighted it, there are limits for new facilities. It was not designed for somebody who doesn't have one. It's designed for one that's operable. Next slide. So that's why we wouldn't be disqualified, because in other words, you can't even apply if you don't have an operable lab. So what is my recommended pathway for moving forward? Question number 2, and the next slide, is that what this is, and I mentioned the forensic pathway staffing, and I spoke with the CEO, and again, all of these are going to be estimates. Until a facility is built, you can't have contracts that absolutely seal what the numbers are, because there's no reason going through thousands of dollars of creating contracts, legal contracts, when you don't have a functioning facility. But these are estimates that I got. So what we would plan to do in opening up is opening up for like a couple of days, either a week or 2 to 3 days every other week. And these are as close as I could come to what it would cost from forensic pathway staffing is $170,000. Additional annual costs for autopsies, because we have to have supplies for the autopsies. There are instruments that are being used, and roughly, we're estimating that what we would be running through is about, I have the number at the bottom there, an estimated total number of autopsies performed from the coroners in North Idaho who said that they would send them to us. We estimate that next year, or our first operable year, we'd be having 78 of our own, and the additional from other people would be roughly another 91 or so, for about 169. So in other words, in order to do 169 autopsies, we would need $8,400 in line 2 of additional costs, besides the costs of paying for the medical examiner themselves. We estimate that there will be increased utilities since we would be taking over the entire building, but yet at the same time, it's hard to exactly estimate that. I don't know what Kootenai Electric rates are going to be, or Avista, et cetera, or will we be operating both the both refrigeration units at the same time? How much decomp will we have? Will we have decomp 365 days of the year or half the year? I mean, that's why I can only give estimates, because I can't predict the future. We will be saving some money on transportation costs, and right now we're giving Spokane about $144,000 that would come into us. I would like to keep into the budget on an annual basis a grant writer, and grant writers go for about $10,000, but they're priceless if they can bring in $300,000 to $500,000. We would have, of those 169 people, additional histology costs. They don't send histology statements, so our projected ongoing annual expenses would be $67,000. Now, I'm estimating again how much architectural design services would cost for be able to design phase 1 officially, so that we can put it up to bid and then obtain construction. So we've already gotten prices for what the phase 1 would cost, $5,000 for things that we do not expect. So the 1.4 is for basically the construction. So if you had construction plus operable costs, now we're not going to have operable costs for 365 days a year. It'll only be for once it's open. We don't need a autopsy assistant, because the new medical examiner, medical investigator, death investigator that we're hiring, who begins in just a few days, She has worked for a substantial amount of time as an autopsy assistant. So on those days, she would just take that role. And so total expenses add up to 1.5, but again, we're just putting that all together, but we're not going to have a whole year's worth of expenses until the facility is built. So really what I did is I highlighted operable numbers. So the operable numbers for costs once we're operable is $67,000. But you know, it's the surrounding counties that bring in their autopsies to us, charging them $200 or so for using our facility, comes up to $18,000. So in our first year, it would cost us about $50,000 for us to be operating above what we're doing right now. But again, the door is open for us to be able to then receive, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of grants.
Questions?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that we never could have applied for a grant for the initial construction. Okay, now, that's not what I heard earlier in the year. Earlier in the year, I heard we need to get accredited so we can start applying for grants, and that's why we should get accredited. And that we need to hurry up because the deadline this year was in March to apply for a grant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so here we are in the end of July, and now we have a new piece of information that we didn't have before today in order to make a decision.
Right.
Do you understand why I said I believe we should be exhausting the grant option first for construction, because that is the information that your office, you, provided to me in all these previous meetings?
Right.
Because from my perspective, I would rather exhaust grant money before taxpayer money.
Absolutely, and I agree with you.
Okay, so you understand that, you know, this is all, every time we have a meeting, there's a new piece of information that kind of gets plopped on the table. And it makes it very hard to say yes to multi-million-dollar decisions when the information is constantly changing.
Well, what's interesting is that I sought this information from people who are at the head of the organization. I know the president of the organization, et cetera. And what everyone is basically saying is that I was relating information that was provided to me, which I thought was substantiated because of who they were. So at the same time, if they weren't exactly accurate, what became absolutely accurate and in writing was the lecture this year. I attended this conference last year, and they didn't have a lecture delineating and clarifying as much as they did this year. But once I saw that, I took pictures, that's when it became clear. So I just based everything on the information provided, and so it's been peeled and revealed, and I've just passed it on as soon as I got it. But it's not as if I wasn't seeking it.
Okay, but I hope you can at least understand from my perspective that it's very hard to say yes to big dollar decisions.
Sure.
When the information is constantly kind of changing. It's not a
Sure.
criticism of you, but it's saying I can't make a good decision if I don't have good information.
I understand that, and I was trying to present the best that I could.
Yes, but I can't say yes to a multi-million-dollar decision even if the information changes a little bit each meeting.
Got it. But this is solid.
Well, I think at this point, the fact that if we cannot apply for a grant to start an autopsy lab, then that option is off the table.
Exactly.
So now it becomes, you know, does this board want to agree to use taxpayer money to build an autopsy lab? And then, you know, after that, we have still some what ifs. I mean, there's no guarantees. Your numbers, if anything, I would argue, are precisely wrong. And that's not a criticism. You got exact numbers. I mean, you know, I don't think anyone can tell that you're going to have 169 autopsies performed in FY26.
When you say exactly wrong, what are you basing that
I mean
on?
that when you use exact numbers, you're not going to have 169. It's not a criticism. It's that in the world of business, there's a saying, it's better to be partially right than precisely wrong. And so when you put together an estimate of the future, there's no way you're going to know that. I mean, if you come in at 169 autopsies in FY26, I want to know what the Powerball numbers are from you, because
bet.
you're that good.
You bet. I'll give them to you. What I was trying to do is be as accurate as I could, and those were based on the numbers of me calling every coroner in North Idaho.
I get
And they
it.
said, this is what I estimate, so I added them up and came up with 91. So I passed on 91. I wasn't trying to promise 91, I was trying to, just give you as accurate as I could.
I get it. It's an estimate, exactly, you know. But my point is just now we have, you know, if we agree to go forward with building the autopsy lab, there's still going to be a lot of numbers that are going to have to really come into focus on the overhead. The option I see you presenting here is a third-party option where is this a 1099 contract with a person? Or is this that third party? Because last week you said there's a third party that you spoke to.
Forensic Pathology Associates, the staffing.
Okay, so that's the 170,000.
Yes.
Okay. All right, and that 170,000 is not on a per autopsy.
No.
It's on a per time.
Right.
Assuming that is there a difference in price between a 4 or 6 days per month? Because that's a 50% increase from 4 to 6.
No, what you're paying them for is to come to your facility for a day or two. And so they cover transportation, they cover licensing, they cover malpractice. In other words, they take all of the work out of everyone's hands. You're just paying them for the number of days that they're there. So if they see 10 in a day or 2 in a day, it doesn't make any difference.
So is there a difference in price between 4 days a month and 6 days a month?
Oh, sure, because paying per day.
Okay, so where's your 170,000 based on? 4 days or 6 days?
An average of 4 to 6.
So 5. Okay.
But I didn't want to put too accurate of a number in there. I'm giving you a range because we haven't settled on the exact date.
All right, so that's 5 days a month. And how many autopsies do you think they could perform in 5 days?
Well, they can do about 4 to 5 a day. So, you know, they'd be able to do 20. And we're talking about 15, 16.
Okay, so if they did, I mean, we'll go on the higher end, 5 times 5, 5 bodies a day, 5 days a month, right? That's 25 a month. So, and then that puts us at roughly 300 for a month. So there's some cushion there as far as the total amount. So it actually could go down. It could be 4 days a month, technically. Okay.
Exactly.
All right, so you pay by day. So you're leveraging their time in essence. So, okay. Can you send this presentation to us after today?
Sure, he's got it.
Oh, okay, all right. Great, I'd like to take a look at it.
Okay.
I appreciate the new information. You know, I stand by everything I've said before. I'm not opposed to it. I was just opposed to using taxpayer money first and not even trying to exhaust the grant option, which until today always seemed to be an option because that's the way it was initially presented.
And that was the way it was presented to me. And
I understand that.
And that's why I went so, aggressively after the accreditation. And that's why we went aggressively during the process. Most people take 1.5 years to get it. We got it in 8 months. I mean, we're in the top echelon. We have pushed the limit here by
I understand.
trying to save the taxpayer money.
And the other side to this, too, was the fact that, not only did I ask to pull it out of the budget, so we had a shot at the grant. Because you can't apply for a grant if it's in your budget.
Right.
That's supplanting.
Right.
But I also asked for the top line revenues to come down. So that money, we couldn't find new expenses to allocate to that money. So it was really a net zero. It was never meant to eliminate the autopsy lab. It was meant to exhaust the grant option.
Got it.
And
I understand that.
Right. Because there seems to be this theme that I'm very against this. And, I've said from the very beginning, I'm not against it. I just don't want to spend taxpayer money.
And neither do I.
Before we've exhausted the other options.
Exactly, and neither do I. And that's why I went aggressively after the grant, if I could. And the information I was getting was, well, you can apply for the grant, you can apply for the grant. And then when we started going down that pathway, it's like, oh, this is only for people with, so in other words, it became absolutely crystal clear with this lecture and the presentation of somebody representing the Department of Justice where the Coverdell grant comes from. So it's like, okay, this is absolutely crystal clear now.
Yeah. Well, as you know, and not to belabor it, but you're only as good as the people and the information you get, and we're only as good as the people and information that we work with. And
Sure,
so,
absolutely.
you know, my job is to be skeptical and try to slow things down, especially on big decisions,
Yep.
until we have all the facts squared away. And I don't want to be in a position that says, you know, our coroner gave us this information and it wasn't right,
Sure.
you know. And so I appreciate your effort and what you put forth. And I think this is a much more clear understanding of what we're making a decision on. So
Great.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Bill, were you able to join us?
Yes, oh yes, I was here right as the meeting started.
Okay, and do you have any questions?
No, I don't, but I agree completely with Bruce. I'm seeing, I feel like the ground is kind of shifting under our feet in terms of this whole idea of a autopsy lab. So I listened intently to the presentation, but I'm still going to be interested in more information.
Do you have any questions for me, Bill?
Not at this point.
Okay,
All right, thank you, Dr. Duke.
thank you.
All right, item 3, Natural Resource Advisory Board recommendation and request. And we've got Jamie Sturgis here, and I'm sorry, you're David Brown. Okay. All right, and then you just push the little button on there, it'll turn green, and you can leave it right there.
We are green to go. And this is a polished presentation that's being made up on the spot with help from Jonathan Gillum over here in the control room. And this photograph was sent while I was going in a blackout zone over 4th of July about an hour ago. And so do you have 6 photos or 2? All right, so let's all see them for the first time. This is a picture taken on the east bank, I believe, on the lower Coeur d'Alene River. I call the lower Coeur d'Alene River from Harrison upstream to about the Highway 90 bridge that goes at Cataldo. Okay, and this is orange type material on the bottom is the subject of this discussion. And David has a part of it that has to do with a regulatory request for a call to for comment and a call for input, which we're going to ask the county to provide support for, which makes some grant money available, we believe, that can make this type of material stabilized. And then on my part is going to be to ask for kind of a policy or a support for a position that I'd like to take as a technical leadership group representative of Kootenai County in the annual work request that EPA is putting together through the Basin Environmental Cleanup Program for the Bunker Hill Superfund site.
Sure. So just for the audience who doesn't live and breathe it like you and I do,
Okay. Right.
you're right. So this is part of the cleanup area from the, like you're saying, Bunker Hill Mine and under the Basin Commission. The Basin Commission does have funds for cleanup. And I think part of the frustration for Kootenai County has been is very little money has been spent outside of the really Shoshone County to facilitate cleanup. And so this is one of the better ideas that has come forward, but not been funded yet. So hopefully that clears up.
And can I just add to on top of that there's two main regions here. There's up by where the mining occurred, and then there's down by the Coeur d'Alene River where it meets the lake, and that has not been remediated yet.
Correct. So
And-
lower Basin.
Yes, but just so people understand where that is.
Right.
And so that's what this discussion is about, is that remediation and that part of the river, because there's so much metals still that can get into the lake.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
So what I'd like to, I just wanted to, as I go 90 miles an hour sometimes, apologize. I'll slow it to 50. But if we can go through the second slide, there's 5 slides. This is a typical picture of the bank. This is we did a visit with the executive director of the Basin Commission. Commission represents 3 counties: Shoshone, Benewah, and Kootenai, and the EPA and the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, and the tribal interests. And each of those members gets a vote in in the fall about the upcoming work plan submitted by the Environmental Protection Agency, which covers a dozen or more different areas. One of the areas that is the subject today has to do with the lower basin from where mine waste from the mining activity for 100 years has been placed. This is a classic. You can see the sediment lines here on the side of the bank. In large storm events and spring runoff and big storm events, materials mobilized from the river bottom. And for many, many years, decades actually, the traditional disposal practice or incidents allowed for the ore, after most of the minerals have been removed, to wash downstream and settle. And if you see the bright orange layer in the bottom, the older material at the lower end typically has more trace metals remaining in it, lead and zinc, and sometimes arsenic and some phosphorus, because the process of removing the valuable materials from the ore was less efficient back 50 or 100 years ago than it was in the later years. Next picture. This is an area that's been stabilized using what David will talk about, the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service method of prepping the bank and then armor plating it with riprap, which has got a very long lifespan of use, and that keeps the continual wave action and boat traffic from eroding, putting the material off the banks into the river bottom, where the only way it can go is through the river down to Harrison and then ultimately into Lake Coeur d'Alene. Next slide. Here's an area of partially stabilized bank, but you can see it continues at high water to slough. Next slide. This is an area that the only reason the banks are flatter here is the high levels of boat access and recreation activity. This is not where I want my children or anybody else's children or pets or people to recreate, but there's a few places along the 30 miles of river where these are the only beaches available, and they get a lot of use in the boating season. Next. This is, trying to remember exactly what this picture is. Well, it just shows kind of the typical situation where you've got willows and grass along the edge, and it can hold up under most conditions, and then we get a high flood water, and then it breaks off in large tonnage pieces. Next. Or is this the last one? Okay. So that sets the tone for what we're going to talk about, and we'll go through this pretty quickly. Dave, you want to first introduce your background and why you were on the Resource Advisory Board?
Oh, I was going to save that piece of information. No. My name is Dave Brown. I'm part of your Natural Resources Advisory Board, and we're presenting to you today a letter of request that will go to the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So NRCS is the federal agency that has and provides both technical and financial assistance to farmers and ranchers in Kootenai County and around the country. Part of their program includes what they call a source water protection program. So that provides an opportunity to target money at the implementation of conservation practices that would be furthering the protection of source water for drinking water. Coeur d'Alene Lake is currently an identified area of concern and interest for NRCS to prioritize their money and their assistance to private landowners to implement practices that would be protective of Coeur d'Alene Lake. However, what they did not include in their current designation is the lower river that you were just talking about. So you've got 20 miles, how 30 miles of river below Cataldo coming into the lake. You can see the condition of the banks there. And so annually, the NRCS puts out a request for entities like the county or conservation districts to ask for changes and updates to their source water protection program. And so that's what we've drafted here is an update request for them to do two things. One, include the lower river in their area of priority, and also to include the conservation practice of bank stabilization into their list of eligible practices for this prioritization, which currently bank stabilization is not one of their practices eligible for this priority. So in the case that you submit the letter and NRCS agrees with it and adds both the lower river as well as the bank stabilization practice, what this does then is when farmers and ranchers go into the NRCS to make an application for projects that they're interested in implementing, those projects that would be in the lower river and that would be these kinds of bank stabilization practices like we've been talking about here, those would receive a higher priority for funding. They would also receive a higher level of funding. So maybe in most cases, a landowner might receive 50% of the cost of doing a practice. Under this prioritization, they might receive 75, maybe even up to 90% of the cost of implementing the practice. So it makes it more likely they would be able to financially undertake these kinds of things, which there's not a lot of return benefit, financial benefit to a farmer rancher to implement this. It certainly helps the environment, not so much for them. So the document you see in front of you kind of lays that out to NRCS, talks about why we would want to do that here in Kootenai County. It keeps those metals in place. It keeps it from going into the lake. Of course, the lake is a source of drinking water, both direct withdrawal as well as the interaction of the outflow in the Spokane River and that interchange with the Spokane-Rathdrum aquifer. So that's what you have in front of you. We've drafted that for your consideration. If you've had any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those for you.
Okay. Bill, any questions?
Well, I'm interested in what percent of the pollutants that are coming down the Coeur d'Alene River drop off fairly quickly into the lake, and what percent goes through to the Spokane River.
I might try what's called a SWAG, a scientific, wild, but carefully thought out
Guess.
estimate. I wouldn't call it. It's more than a guess, but the highest single source of continuing sediment loading and metal contaminant loading into Lake Coeur d'Alene at this time is the stream bottom and the stream banks of the stretch of river we're talking about, Harrison to Cataldo. And of the, I think it's something in excess of 60 or 70% of the loading, and this is particulate loading, it's not necessarily the dissolved metals in the stream. I don't have those numbers, but it's coming from the stream bed and it's coming from the stream banks. Between those, I've seen estimates between 10% and 15 or 16% of being directly attributed to the banks. There's been continuing study by EPA and their contractors and over the years, and there continue to be more studies of just how much and how fast and how soon those products are. Not much gets out of Lake Coeur d'Alene all the way down the Spokane River, but there is some, and that's the reason that the state of Washington has already done a very serious and successful cleanup program on their riverbanks in the state of Washington, where the Spokane River goes across the state line and down. I don't know if I was able to answer your question, but that's as much as I can offer right now. Any other questions, Bill?
It's just, you know, I see what you're saying exactly, but I wonder if the only way we can handle this is to totally encase the banks of the Coeur d'Alene River north of Harrison, so the hazardous material falls to the bottom of the river immediately. And then I've seen PowerPoints when the water outflows from the Coeur d'Alene River into Lake Coeur d'Alene, it drops right straight to the bottom very quickly. And of course, you get the dissolved pollutants. And the same person who did this study, he said, think of Lake Coeur d'Alene as a big toilet bowl. And in the spring, if things are right, we get a good flush. This bothers me.
That's a technical term that I probably didn't learn, a toilet bowl, but I liken it more to a septic system where you've got something that goes on inside of the tank, and then you have a drain field, and the stuff settles in the drain field and filters, and some goes into the groundwater, but by then it's typically been sorted or filtered out. But I think what I'd like to do, if we can, is maybe you want to wait and deal with both of these ideas. I can go in and give a short version of what the other request is today we have for the county, is to support a position that I'm going to offer, and I'll summarize it pretty carefully here. Since 2017, when I got involved as the county's representative on the technical leadership group, I have pushed at each annual meeting to be more specific about when EPA is going to address and start actually remediating the stream banks and the stream bottom. And I carried this torch from a man named Bill Rust, who was a representative since 2008, who's been pushing and schooled me on what he thought was an obvious technical solution. Each of Bill and I each have backgrounds in the mining industry and remediation industry going back 30, 40 years. And some things are clear. There's estimated between 10 million and 20 million tons of total material between Harrison and Cataldo that is either largely or a majority or partly contaminated mine waste mixed with natural sediments. Phenomenally huge numbers. It's not all in one place. It's well distributed, some over the bank and away from the banks. But the concept of other alternatives, such as dredging and having a major dredging operation, I see as about as likely as putting a ladder to the moon. So what I did in the 2-page letter that I sent with this request for the county to support a position here, it summarizes the past director of the Basin Commission, Terry Harwood, who has been the director of the Basin, or executive director of the Basin Commission for, I think it was 10 or 12 years or more. And he did a paper in 2019 very specifically addressing these issues. And he said, here's what's things that I don't think will work, here's some things that might work, and here's things I recommend that we fix. So every year I would try and urge the EPA and the annual work plan to be specific. Don't say you're going to do this in 5 years from now in the 5-year plan. Let's do something this year. Feasibility studies, prep studies, cost analysis, alternatives comparison, and get some pilot projects going. And at some resistance I would get, before I got my vote, before they got my vote to support it, they would put in a general statement that 2 years from now we'll start doing something. And since 2017 to 19 to 2024, that 2-year thing is like the word mañana, which doesn't really mean the day after today. It means tomorrow, which means it's put off in the future. So I'm here today to ask the county to basically to consider the 2-page letter that I would like to have our county's representative to the Basin Commission put forward, and frankly withhold the vote for the annual work plan and the 5-year work plans until there's specifics to do the 5 items that I've identified in bold that I think you received as the materials.
I really like your letter, and I agree completely with it. And I think we have to just not do mañana anymore. We have to do now, because this people and animals and it's the entire lake is being polluted as we don't do anything.
Bruce, questions?
No, I agree with the concept. And, you know, for those watching at home, the gist of this entire subject matter is that there are some letters that the board is being asked to basically agree to, sign, and to stake a position, to seek funding, to kind of armorize the banks of the Coeur d'Alene River down south. And so I'm completely in agreement with that, and I hope that I think we will support it, and hopefully you'll be successful in your endeavors to help make that happen. So thank you.
I have one last comment, and that's that there's a date on the SWP letter request. August 16th, I think, is the closure of the window for getting the lower river and the bank stabilization added to the NRCS qualifications. And there is $500 million in a trust fund to clean up the Silver Valley mining district. It's not just Bunker Hill site, the other ones too, but that $500 million is actually, there's more money now than when the trust fund was established, because it's been well managed from a trustee standpoint. And my frustration is it's not meant to grow as a trust, it's meant to clean up the program. So the 5 things here are pretty specific, and we're asking for the consideration by the EPA to spend at least $1 million apiece on each of the 4 items. And if there's no other questions, I thank you for your time.
Yep, and I will work on the letters, getting them signed by the board and probably put on the consent calendar for next Tuesday and get those where you can turn them in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, item 4, Kootenai North Evidence Filter Relocation, and this is Corey Trapp. And then I think what we're going to do is probably put item 5 till the last, and because we've got folks waiting for the crosswalk and the advisory board, the advisory ballot, sorry. So, all right, Corey, go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. Corey Trapp, LTA Architects. What's happened with this is the original intent was there was 2 filters in the current evidence storage rooms that we were going to relocate. The original intent was to have Tom's Reed staff take those down, the county staff take those down and move them. It's come to our we've looked at them, and it's become to our attention it's a little more complicated and probably above Tom's staff's ability to take those down, and also the time frame that they just don't have the time to do it. So we have we got a cost from the contractor to have them come in and take them and relocate them, and it's $5,673.88 to have them do that. We're just kind of giving you a heads up. The work's going to be done in stages. We're going to take the one from the Pierce Craig building, move it into what's going to become the drug storage room, because the biggest issue is the one that's actually in the basement. They can't take that one out until all the racks are moved, and that's where the drug storage is. So anyway, we're just kind of giving you a heads up. We're going to bring that to you as a change order to do. And then I have one other item. Just came to our attention yesterday that the 2 mechanical heating units for the evidence storage, the mechanical engineer had electric heat in there. The electrical engineer did not pick it up and get it into the panels. So we've got this is just a preliminary number just from Thorco of $3,195. Does not include the contractor's overhead markup yet. We're still looking into this and double checking the numbers, but that'll be coming to you as a change order item also.
Okay, Bill, questions?
I have no questions.
All right, Bruce?
Nope.
Okay, thanks, Corey.
All right, thank you.
Okay, handling item 5 last, we'll go to item 6, which is crosswalk installation letter of support request. And I believe there are people here who could speak to that if they wanted to. We received a request, and we've got pictures and diagrams and all kinds of good things to help us decide if we would like to write a letter of support to the highway district. And I believe that we did get an email stating that the sheriff's office is in support of it as well. So you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, good morning. I'm Lindsay Olmstead. I'm General Manager at Hayden Lake Marina. This was a request I submitted almost 2 months ago now to the Northern Lakes Highway District without much response, so I broadened my reach to get support from the general community, because Hayden Lake not only services Hayden Lake residents and such, but also surrounding community members, Coeur d'Alene and Spokane as well. The Hayden Lake Marina services 222 marina boat slips. We are a seasonal operation, but of course the season is when that road is the most busiest, and that is East Hayden Lake Road.
Yeah, I know.
In the last 90 days, we've averaged 130 customers to the on-site restaurant. And while we do have 100 or so parking spots on site, the majority of them are on the south side of the road, which has to cross Hayden Lake Road to access the marina and restaurant, etc. So some of these pictures here are just looking towards the west at the curve. And of course, it's around this big, ugly curve. Picture number 2 would be the proposed site of the crosswalk from the intersection of East Tobler Road over to the marina site. This is coming to the east, looking down towards that intersection. again, just some other angles of where we would propose to put in a crosswalk and look for some support also with like flashing signs, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Sure. Bruce?
The only question I had, which I think you just answered, is that it's more than just a painting on the street, but it's actually the flashing signs, because I think you need that, because people, as more and more people move here, we're starting to see a little higher speeds and a little less attention to what's going on around.
Yeah, especially with that curve being kind of so broad, and people come both from the east and the west at higher rates of speed than is the posted speed limit, which is 25. There's not enough time always to see traffic that might be in the middle of the road. And I've literally been hand in hand with my 2 children walking across the street and been like, okay, fast feet, girls, because we're going to have, somebody come and I don't know if they're going to have eyes. So the flashing lights would be a big part of it around the whole curve.
Well, I support it. So.
Okay. Bill, any questions?
No, I actually had a boat at that marina for quite some time, and I'm telling you, that is a treacherous stretch of road for the pedestrian, especially traffic coming from the west, because I think that people who are new to the area, who are looking around and going out to see Hayden Lake, go down that road, and they don't realize what's ahead of them. So I think it's very important to give them a clue to slow down. I've had to cross it with children, and it really is frightening.
Okay, so you support the letter?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Just like with the other letters, we'll get those in front of the board to sign and put on consent calendar. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
All right. Item 7, advisory ballot question regarding voting guide. I just received an email from a gentleman who would like the commissioners to support this. And I just wanted to get your thoughts. Bill, did you have an opportunity to read the request?
Yes, I did. And now, who would do the final edit on the guide?
Well, that's probably a question that we aren't able to answer here. So it's the legislature that would have to allocate funds for the state to do that, and I am assuming the Secretary of State's office would be where this voter guide would land.
Okay, well, I'm in favor of the more information we can provide voters, the better.
Okay, Bruce?
Bill touched on the fact of who. And the problem with who is that we're not talking about just a couple of races throughout the state. We're talking about hundreds of races throughout the state. And where does that information come from? How is it vetted? How do we know it's honest and accurate? And since when has the government ever engaged in information campaigns that we could count on as being honest, accurate, and truthful? And so I think something like this is really not an endeavor that government should be looking into. I'm not suggesting that people don't want more resources for information, but the fact is that a candidate can submit any information they want, and who's going to be the arbiter of whether or not that's accurate? And if there's no one who is legitimately qualified to determine that, then this will look like credible information coming from government, and people will rely on it, and then afterwards they may discover that the information was not true. So I don't really see any point in getting behind this.
Yes, I would agree. I'm not really interested.
Bill or me?
I'm sorry, I agree with you that I don't think we should do this. I mean, coming from California, we had a voter guide, but I didn't really find it extremely helpful. You should do your own research. So that's kind of where I would go as well. So also, we don't even know where we're at with the ballots this year, and I would hate for this to put it to a two-page. So I don't know if Asa Gray, our elections manager, would like to speak to that.
Certainly. With the ballots where we're looking right now, we currently, unless something changes, we have 2 statewide questions that will be going on the ballot, 1 constitutional amendment, 1 ballot initiative. And then while nothing has been, to my knowledge, officially passed, we have a few different local taxing districts that have been discussing putting different questions on the ballot for November. So there is a good chance that in some of those areas, at least, we will be to 2 pages, but possibly not countywide. That just depends on what districts, if any, decide to put anything on. But I will say that we already do have a very long ballot. Even if none of those districts do that as well, we have multiple different levels of races from federal and president on down to NIC and the Kootenai Shoshone Soil and Water Conservation trustees. And then we also will have those 2 questions. So while I don't like to throw this as an argument out very often, voter fatigue could very quickly become a thing if we start adding more and more questions to this year's ballot, to where we have 15 different categories of races, and then you've got 3 or 4 questions to read on top of that. That could be a thing.
Right. So even if you had 2 of 3 commissioners support it, this general election would not be the right location, I don't think, for this.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. So, okay. So I will mark that as we don't support adding a advisory ballot question. And now we can go on to item 5, transit organizational chart and funding discussion with Chad Engel.
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. Chad Engel for the record with the Transit Department. So after the last status update meeting and reflecting on the observations that were made about the organizational chart, we have revisited the chart to see where changes could be made to reflect the department. After there was the changes to the job descriptions after the submitted March 19th organizational chart. So you have before you the 2 different options for the board, and I believe these charts are a good reflection of the department based on FTA requirements and the job descriptions.
Okay. Questions?
Do you have these charts that we can show people?
I submitted them to the board and to HR, but I don't have a...
They're in the weekly folder.
Yeah, no, I understand. I just think it would be interesting or a good idea for people to at least see what we're talking about. The chart that we had before, we had, a director, 2 people underneath the director, and 4 people underneath those 2 people, with no real clear delineation of who those 4 people reported to. This new one is a director with 2 people that report to the director, but one of those people now manages the other 3 people. And I guess the question that I don't understand is, can the director not manage more than 2 people?
Yeah, the director could, yes.
So why have that additional layer? Why not just make the director manage all the people?
So I just gave those to Jonathan, but that position that was put in there is for compliance and for financial. So the financial performance and compliance officer is in there for another layer that we need in order to make sure that we are keeping duties separated for FTA purposes.
But wouldn't they still be separated if you just had a manager and 4 or 5 people that report to that manager?
So you're talking moving the financial performance and compliance officer down to the lower role?
Well, what I'm talking about is that person doesn't manage anybody anyhow, so it's kind of irrelevant where they are. They report to this position that's called the director. And then you have a program manager, so you got 1 person between the director and the program manager who manages 3 people. I've just never seen a situation where a director or a manager needs another manager to manage 3 people underneath them. Why not just have a director and 4 or 5 direct reports?
So again, in order to meet the requirements that we need for FTA and in order to make sure that we are covering all the fulfillments of the requirements, these are the positions that are needed to make that happen.
So FTA says we have to have 3 layers?
Well, there
within
has
a-
to be
within a-
separation of duties that takes place so that we can make sure that we're in compliance.
So in order for us to be compliant, the director cannot have a direct contact with a transit specialist para, a fleet maintenance manager, or a transit specialist fixed. That the director must have an intermediary between those three positions. Is that correct?
Well, you don't, I mean, the director still has contact with everybody in
So
the
that's why I'm
department, so-
asking, why can't we eliminate this layer and just make it director and then goes to report 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Why do we need to have another layer of management?
So, I mean, this was what was proposed to the board on the 12th, and I had no response as to if this was something that was sufficient for the board. So this is what we're proposing, and this is what I think is good for what we need in the department. And it just gives those different layers of operation, much the same as many departments throughout the county. If you look at many of the org charts, which not all departments have org charts, but many of them are structured in the same manner.
Yeah, well, look, before you, let me explain so people understand. I got an org chart presented to me for this department that we have reorganized, where it had director, manager, 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 employee. It was literally vertical. And, I just find it hard to understand why we need to have these layers with so few people reporting to a manager or a director. And I would have to think that it actually creates expense because now we have more people managing more people. When the reality is we really just have positions that we need work to get done. We don't need to add a managerial layer to the work. That we just have, typically a good manager should be able to manage, 5 to 7 people, really no problem.
So are you suggesting we go through each of the county departments to make sure that they follow this? Because I know that there are several county departments that I can just say off the top of my head that have the same structure, that they do have one manager over 2 people because it's the finance division. Then they have another manager over, 4 people because it's the next layer down.
Well, what I would say is that since you brought it up, I probably would like to revisit that because, this is part of what's going on in this organization. I mean, I have a situation where, because some employees decided not to show up to a meeting, the meeting got canceled. Yet, I and another director organized that meeting. And, so I have to ask myself, are we really operating efficiently? Are we really utilizing taxpayer dollars the way that they would want us to utilize it? And so I would argue that if you think that there's more of this kind of stuff, Commissioner Duncan, and you've been here for a long time, which I would have assumed that this stuff would have been rooted out because, you're a fiscal conservative like myself, then we should be doing this because that is what we're tasked to do by the general public. You don't think so?
I've been busy. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that there's only so much that commissioners can do. And I have not had a problem with the way a lot of these departments have been functioning.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the way I usually look at this stuff is I ask myself, where is the money? Where is the money that can be found and saved? And if I'm busy writing emails saying thank you, as opposed to spending that time looking for where do we have these inefficiencies? And now that I have this year under my belt, I have to be candid. I am seeing massive inefficiencies that are going on inside government. And, we should fix that because, one of the things that I think people will totally appreciate and understand is that if we do have to raise taxes, they can see where that money is going. Right now, with some of the ads for additional staff and so forth, I don't want to go against what people are asking for because it's their department. But I'm going to start demanding, show me. Don't tell me, but show me. And I think it's time that when we start operating in a show me world, then people will start to understand why we need more money to pay for what's going on versus just having these anecdotal stories of what we need. And for this particular org chart, I just have a hard time accepting it that there needs to be an intermediary between a director and 3 other people. And that one intermediary only reports to one, reports up and then has 3 people below them. It just doesn't seem efficient.
So, to your question about funding, the transit department has actually reduced our budget by 84% thus far. So we have been doing our part to reduce the taxpayer burden for Kootenai County.
Now, has that budget include the 2 positions that were hired for ARPA?
No.
No? Okay. So you've actually been reducing positions.
Well, those positions were moved by the board at the beginning of the year.
But they weren't part of transit. They were part of...
They were part of the RMO department, that's
Yeah,
correct.
so
Yes.
that's what I meant. Is the reduction in budget been, are you suggesting the reduction is because of RMO being changed or because the transits? Okay, well, but it's not part of transit. We're really talking about transit now, right?
That's correct, but,
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the budget overall, we have still had a reduction in the transit department budget. Even any of the money that was put towards the transit department has been a reduction.
Yeah.
And we're actually proposing that we just eliminate the A budget completely, and so it would all be FTA funded. And so that would be another $52,890 that we would reduce from there.
Yeah, and that's basically shifting from an A budget expense to now, which I suppose will be the next subject to discuss, cash match. So we used to use salary as a match.
Correct.
So it's just shifting things around. It's not necessarily cutting, but I understand.
So it would be cutting because the $200,000 in match funds are available to us should we need them. And it's money that the board already puts aside for the grant match. So it's nothing new that's being levied. This is what the board has done for, correct me if I'm wrong, many years.
We've had it available, it just has not been used.
Correct.
So how much money do the cities put in?
So the city's put in, this next round is going to be $163,000.
And that's aggregate, all of the cities?
Yes, that is all 5 of them. Yep.
And how much should we put in? Are you recommending?
Well, I'm asking for an option to potentially get the 200,000, but that's, again, should we need it.
Yeah.
So it would first be the other in-kind match options that we have. Then we use the local jurisdictions, and then the county would be the last resort should we need it.
Yeah. I think the most that any one city contributes is $49,000.
Coeur d'Alene is higher at $101,000.
Okay, well, it's a different report I'm looking at, but that's fine. So out of 150-some thousand, Coeur d'Alene kicks in 101,000, you say?
That's
So the rest of the cities that they combined kick in about 50?
correct.
Okay. But we are potentially allocating 200,000.
Well, don't forget that we tax the city and all the cities as well.
That what?
So we tax all the cities as well. So when it's a county expense, it is distributed amongst all of the parcels in the county, not just unincorporated areas.
Well, yes, I understand your point. To me, it's a little more potato, because the reality is that this isn't a state mandated service for the county. But the other side to this that kind of stands out to me is that the money that we're talking about allocating is from fund balance. Is that correct?
That's just the match, so our auditor would have to speak more towards that because that's just a match funding that they had told us that would be the appropriate
So it comes from
place.
fund balance. We're not levying for it, right? So it's not a B budget.
I don't know that Chad has that answer, so he's
No,
looking
it
over
would
at
be audited.
finance. So yes, I believe that's in fund balance?
So since my office handles all of the accounting responsibilities, including GAP and GASB compliance for these grants, I can answer that question. Yes, it would come from fund balance.
Okay. So is this a one-time thing or a recurring thing?
Well, this would be every year, and so it'd be
So
recurring.
we probably
every year.
shouldn't be using fund balance for recurring expenses.
Yeah, this is what was proposed to us by auditors to be the way to move forward.
The auditing department proposed this to you?
Correct.
Brandy was not at that meeting. We had a discussion as we were looking to take people off maybe county tax dollar monies for funding for a budget and shifting them more to FTA. But there was discussion about that they would still need a certain amount of money. But the questions I still have, is that an FTA requirement or is that something we're doing for our partnerships? So if we do use, we have 500,000, she said, in reserves for fund balance for grants. But if we're looking at 200,000, is that a $200,000 commitment every year? Or are we just saying 200,000 for this year?
I think it sounded like every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we need to levy for that if it's every year. We should not be even discussing fund balance for this kind of money.
So the other thing is that we're not talking about budgeting 200,000, and I have had an hour-long conversation with David Ferguson about the way we do the accounting for our fund balance to ensure it's in compliance with county budget law. The way we do it is correct and also in compliance with government accounting standards. It would be an assignment of fund balance. So you currently have 500,000 in assigned fund balance in Fund 10 for grant match. You could pull out 200,000 of that and say we are assigning this for transit grant match, but it will not be used, it will not be appropriated and put into transit's budget until the board signs a legally binding grant agreement, and at the time of that signing of that agreement you specify we're going to use X amount of dollars in cash match. So it would only get spent as grant agreements come forward and as the board agrees to use it throughout the year. So essentially, if whatever you use, then the next year when we do our assigned fund balance resolution, you could build up back to 200,000, whatever you've used throughout the year, if you want to use fund balance for it, or you can choose to levy for it. That's up to the board.
Well, if it's recurring, I don't see how we want to play the accounting game with fund balance. Now, the other side to this is that there's about $500,000 in there right now.
Yes.
Okay, so if we assign 200,000 there, that's going to tell all the other departments in the county that there's only 300,000 left for actual cash match, and that could potentially discourage them from applying for grants, knowing that this money might get spent down or there's not enough there to cover the grant.
Correct, and it's usually, we don't have a department with recurring grants that we use general fund balance for. Like the airport that has their recurring grants, they use their own fund balance for their grant match. As far as I'm aware, the grant match in Fund 10 is for departments like Parks and Waterways has a big grant coming up they want to use some of it for, so.
And how many times has that particular signed number been used?
As far back as I can see, since I can see that it's been assigned for grant match prior to my time at the county, I don't believe it's been utilized. I don't think departments were really aware that it existed.
Okay.
Well, if we're not using it, then why do we have that account and why do we have $500,000 just sitting there?
It's before my time. I could try and go back and see the intent of the board at that time that assigned it.
Yeah, it sounds like we should either use that money or, not. But if we're not going to use it, it should go into, our regular fund balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now we have two departments who have requested to use that. So I think it's a good thing to keep right now, and we can review it in the spring.
Well, it sounds like this recurring request needs to be levied if it's an annual request. And that's what it says in the letter I got here. It says commissioners instead designate an annual allowance of $200,000. So we know that this is what we're going to want on a recurring basis.
Okay. Bill, your thoughts on the recurring versus the fund balance?
Well, I want to go back to what Bruce said. I didn't want to interrupt. I think it would behoove us really to undertake a look at each department and find out if they're following an example where we have too many directors, but basically too many Indians, chiefs, and too few Indians, and we pay a lot of money for that. And we should be more proactive in seeking that out and not wait until it jumps up and hits us in the face. That's my big takeaway so far.
Right. And Bill, in your last 5.5 years here, have you come across departments that you've wanted to look at?
You know what? I really have, but it's been not very often. And as you said, I was doing other things. There's a lot to do as a commissioner, but I think that would be something well worth doing. I don't think it would take too long, but I think it needs to be done.
Okay.
Well, it sounds like we should start getting org charts for departments. So unless there's anyone who objects, I'll have Sarah start sending out requests, or we'll go to HR and we'll start getting org charts and taking a look at it.
Yep, Sarah's already.
I think that's a good idea.
Yep. So she'll have that to you today, probably.
Can we also show past org charts if departments have reduced managers to supervisors too? Like in auditor, I think we had 4 or 5 supervisor managers, and now we're down to 3.
We reduced at the recommendation of HR.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. I don't hear of any direction on the transit organizational chart and funding, except for I guess we have to add it to the budget. I would like to see, since this is a first year of separation, that we just use the assigned fund balance and monitor it quarterly and find out where we're going to be.
I think that if we're going to ask for an annual allowance, then we should pick a dollar amount that we're going to use on an annual basis.
Does the memo specify if cash match from assigned fund balance is a last resort, as opposed to the other kinds of match available? And did it also specify what fiscal year this is going to go into effect? Because I know that we had a lot of match expire from Kootenai Health, I believe, and I know that we have not always spent the available matches from all of our other sources. So is this cash match intended to be, I thought it was stated to be used as a last resort.
That's correct.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. The first one is, does FTA require us to do this? Yes, no. If the answer is no, then I'm not sure why we're doing it.
Well, we're required to have local match.
Okay.
So it's a requirement of all the grants to have local match.
Okay. And local match meaning from the county, or local meaning from the area that uses it, like Kootenai Health?
Yeah, it could be any of the areas. That's why we have different sources of match.
Now, we just recently wrote off a little over $1 million of Kootenai Health match because we didn't use it. Now, were we able to confirm with FTA that we can use it?
We had another meeting with FTA just recently, and they're still working on that matter. And they said they're going to be getting back to us. It's still something that I am intently pursuing, because it was something that I had brought up to you in the meeting previous, that was something that I was seeking, because we do need to know. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to make sure that past contributions are being utilized. And like I said before, we have done things differently than when we did it in the past. And that was obviously before I was a part of making those decisions. And so we've sought out every possible way for the county so that we can minimize impact that we have, and so that we're utilizing as much of the federal funds as we possibly can. So we are doing everything that we possibly can in order to make sure that we're doing what's best for the county.
Yeah. Well, I recognize the fact that you've inherited some stuff at this point, but these are still pretty significant issues, and it's hard to kind of explain to folks that we wrote off $1 million a match, but meanwhile we want to allocate $200,000 out of our fund balance in cash. So it doesn't look like we are really, running the entity as efficiently for the taxpayer as they would expect.
So can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is not written off. It's in-kind match that is towards the program regardless. From the understanding that was prior to, that match was only able to be used for certain operational expenses. We further sought clarification that we could use it, and so the match wasn't being fully utilized because it was only for the operational expenses that it could be used for under that understanding. But now we have sought further understanding and we have expanded the availability of the use of that match. And so now moving forward, that's not going to be the case. And again, it wasn't written off, and I'm still getting further clarification from FTA, because if it comes back the way that my understanding is, then that won't go away. That'll be something that we can continue to use and have. So,
Well, we're getting into, the terms of art here. We can't use it at this point, basically. That it was used for a certain year, and we didn't use it that year, and we can't bring it forward, right? So it's $1 million bucks that we can't use right now.
as far as right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. As far as the chart goes, in good conscience, I cannot support a chart like this. I think it needs to be flatter with one layer of management, meaning I'm someone who's managing the group of people within the department. But that's up to the prerogative of the other two commissioners.
Well, I think once all the commissioners get all the org charts and we can have that discussion, then I'm comfortable with the one that you've submitted without the
The maintenance operator.
yeah.
So if we do move forward with that one, I will advise the board that we will need to contract out services, because as of right now, it's putting us out for a lot of that work, as far as we're then having to cover and go. I mean, I'm consistently every week over, so.
And that's this one right here.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Excuse me, I agree with Bruce. It has to be flatter. There's a well-researched, well-known principle of span of control, and having a flatter org chart in transit certainly meets that qualification.
Yeah, and the only other thing is on the contracting, is that going to be through federal funds or state or county funds?
It would be through federal funds.
Yeah, so, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I would also say that once the bus maintenance location is identified, and if the board goes through with that project, then that we will need to bring that position back.
It'll be revisited, yes. So.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
All right. Public comment.
Good morning, Commissioners. Ron Hartman for the record. I agree with Bruce and Bill. These org charts got to be flattened out. Flatten the responsibility to the lowest level starts with flattening out the organization charts. And when you do that, you increase efficiency big time. And I don't know why you can't have separation of duties and duties of responsibility broken down between a flatter organization. Makes no sense to me whatsoever. And I think every single department in the county's org chart needs to be reviewed. And there needs to be some sort of consistency leveled across all the organizations. I see a huge efficiency gain here. The other one too, using fund balance to fund an organization, and I have clearly stated I'm not in favor of even keeping the transit department whatsoever. I think you need to prepare, if you put this out on a levy, that it's going to fail. And I'll be the first one to vote no for that.
Well, it's not a levy. It's actually levying property taxes.
Oh, well then, okay, I was thinking you were going out for a levy for funds. Well, either way, it's, especially after we listened to the coroner's office today, as far as where we should be utilizing efficiencies that we need for the county. When I look at the money we could spend for the coroner's office, and I look at the money we would be spending for a transit bus system, to me it's really clear where the money needs to be spent. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else, Jonathan? All right, 11:24, meeting adjourned.